Thank you for joining me. My name is Everett Glynn, and on behalf of San Jose State University, I welcome you to my presentation, Examining the Ethics of Field Training in Law Enforcement. I chose this topic because I have personally had experiences as a field trainer and trainee. I was a volunteer for the Santa Cruz Police Department, where I recruited and trained new volunteers for patrol duties. As a trainer, I worked to teach my volunteers the importance of community policing, and I emphasized communication over citations, compassion over aggression. After being a volunteer for 6 years, I became a community service officer for SCPD and had a field training experience that ended my 6-year experience with the organization. Rather than mourn the specifics of my circumstances, I chose to take the opportunity to investigate how police field training can be improved. My research took me through 3 areas. First, I examined the impact of field training on police trainees, specifically the transformative growth that they experienced during this time. Second, I looked at how FTOs affect police in Europe and the United States similarly, despite their different academies and training methods. Finally, I looked at how we can improve field training in the United States in a way that incorporates 21st century methods of policing, such as community-oriented policing. And here are a couple fun photos from my time at training. There's me getting pepper sprayed. There's me getting tased. There's me as a volunteer, and there's me getting tased a second time. I don't recommend getting it twice if you can avoid it. So first, my research took me through a study conducted by Linda Hoel and Evan Christensen. They are researchers at the Norwegian Police University, which actually in Norway here in this academy, they train their officers for 3 to 4 years. This study focuses on in-field training, another way to describe field training, learning in an ethical gray area. So police trainees, they work in an ethical gray area, which means their desire to prove themselves as capable officers overrides their desire to become good police officers. This is essential for the research in this paper, because at this time when officers are training after academy, they found that they learn best from high stress situations. In these situations, their adrenaline spiked, their heart was racing, they were sweaty, there was an intense situation going on. And during this time, more often than not, their ability to treat the public fairly was diminished. Certain scenarios officers enjoyed were sudden stops, where they would stop vehicles at random and search them and practice honing their searching skills, thus practicing treating members of the public as suspects rather than giving them the benefit of the doubt or at least their due process. During field training, their attitudes changed from supporting ethical police work that they would have learned in academy to a more negative, stereotypical street cop attitude emulating those they were around. Secondly, Linda Hoel once more and Thomas Dillern were still working for the Norway Police University here. Becoming a member of the police, workplace expectations of police students during in-field training. This source is beneficial because it helps readers understand the significance of the police trainees' entrance into their professional law enforcement career. During this stage in an officer's development, and this is very important, they are influenced heavily by those around them, specifically their FTO. During this transformative stage in their career, they are going to emulate those around them. They are going to want to prove themselves to those around them. They are going to focus more. If we go back over here to our first source, they are going to focus more on learning about themselves as police officers and proving themselves to their organization that they now work for. They are going to care more about proving themselves than they are going to care about learning how to be good police officers. There are a few issues that have arisen from these practices, such as implicit incorporation of police culture that is passed on from the FTOs and from members of the organization to the other students who continue this cycle of spreading toxic aspects of police tradition. Some of the things that come from that: code of silence, and then resistance to this 21st century academic policing. If you've attended a class at a college that focuses on the hiring process, you may have heard your teachers say, the moment you get out of police academy, you're a field trainer, the first thing he's going to say is, forget everything you learned in academy. Third, we go to Adam Doolin, Linda Doolin, and Yairo Patino. They are PhD holders in criminology, and they've written numerous studies similar to this one, transferring police academy training to the field training experience. This source is essential to my research. FTOs are the bridge between police trainees and their future as solo patrol officers. This study demonstrates that the FTO is the dependent variable when measuring an officer's future success outside of their performance in the academy. What this means is when they looked at how police officers were performing in academies. Now, this is not to say that during the 6-month academy, this was not producing good officers. In fact, the officers that performed really well and were paired with good FTOs generally went on to be good officers. But officers, even when they did well in academy, if they were paired with field training officers who had a history of complaints, for example, the officer themselves was more likely to have complaints generated against them within their first few years on the force. Field training is the first time officers will apply academy training to practical police work. This process is known as training transfer. This process is guided by the field training officer who serves as an intermediary. It's the intervention step, if you will, where they are trying to help the officers correctly or, in some cases, incorrectly apply what they learned during field training, or excuse me, during their academy in field training and later as solo patrol officers. And if this step here, if they are learning from FTOs who themselves perpetuate toxic aspects of police culture, they are very likely to emulate those aspects of police culture themselves. And fourth, we go to Olga Kozlin, who is a writer for The Atlantic, who is making the argument that American police are inadequately trained. And this source poses the argument, and this is important for my paper and what I found. Police in the United States are inadequately trained. Kozlin uses the examples Derek Chauvin, who was convicted of murdering George Floyd, which sparked a lot of discussion around police use of force. But one thing that in some cases was overshadowed is that Derek Chauvin was an active field trainer who had a trainee with him. And some would say Derek Chauvin, Kozlin notes, had been an officer for roughly 20 years, and because the field training application process didn't screen his conduct summary any further than about 3 to 5 years, there was a track record of complaints against him that were missed in the screening process. And additionally, we have Kim Potter, who was training two trainees at the time when she fired her Glock 17, believing it was her taser. Both of these instances were criminally negligent and clearly not setting a good example for future officers. And she notes that, Kaza notes that police in the United States are inadequately trained compared to their counterparts in Europe, who often receive years of training, as noted prior, Norwegian Police Academy, 3 to 4 years of training. Field training officers in the United States are holding institutions back from police reform. Now, what I found to make an argument against what Kazan is saying, police in the United States, after their 6-month academy, after a few months of field training, about usually 3 to 4, they were still producing good officers. In European academies that are 3 to 4 years long, they were still producing not so good officers. There's one variable that stands out. One thing that is impacting both officers in Europe after several years of academy and what would be good officers outside of academy in the United States after about 6 months. It's their FTO. There's a dependent variable. The dependent variable is the conduct of their FTO and what their FTO is going to teach. We have to remember, and every source that I looked through noted that there's not a lot of research in this department yet. But we do know that during this stage of training, when people are assimilating into an organization, they're joining the police force for the first time for many of these young officers, they are highly susceptible to be influenced by those around them. Now, in my research, I found that the FTO themselves is not trained very well to be an FTO. They are relying on their experiences as an officer. And if they, as an officer, were taught toxic aspects of police culture, there is no intervention step for the intermediary to hone their skills in modern policing tactics before meeting the next generation of recruits. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily matter. In the United States, if we make the argument that police are undertrained in the academy, they need 10 months of training, a year of training before they're on the streets, but then they are paired once again with an FTO who is going to say, forget what you learned in academy, this is how we do it on the streets. More academy time may not be the answer, and what I will argue in my research paper is that the FTO's training must be enhanced. Their time as an officer must not be their determining factor as an FTO. It must be that they were properly trained to be an FTO. So without further ado, I will get to my opening paragraph and my thesis. Police officers must exercise their power responsibly using appropriate discretion. The broad scope of police powers invites ethical dilemmas, particularly for new officers. George Floyd was killed while being detained by Derek Chauvin, a field training officer for Minneapolis Police Department. Dante Wright was shot by Kim Potter, an FTO for Minneapolis Police Department, who mistook her service weapon for her taser. Both veteran officers performed criminally negligent acts while training police recruits. As FTOs, they failed to serve as ethical, mindful police officers, and their actions call into question workplace learning and policing. Field training is the first time police trainees will bridge the gap between theoretical and practical policing. At this time, police trainees are undergoing professional and moral development influenced by their superiors, specifically their FTOs. My thesis: because of the impact field training has on future police officers, FTOs must not promote harmful and unethical practices that harm community police relations and perpetuate toxic aspects of police culture. Thank you for listening. Once again, my name is Everett Glynn for San Jose State University.